Hey everybody, this is Jeff Lindsay. I'm going to show you guys a demo of something we'll be releasing soon called command.io, which is actually cmd.io. It's currently a SSH only service. It's not a web app or anything. You only use it over SSH. You'll notice I didn't put in a username because I happen to have the same local username as my GitHub username. So it uses GitHub to authenticate. It uses my SSH keys on GitHub. You might have to put in your GitHub username. I don't. And we've got some commands here. These are meta commands, the ones with the colons. These basically are for managing the commands. Here's the commands that I have installed. And we'll just go ahead and run one of these commands. This is a little welcome message command. And all of these commands are actually Docker containers. So we can actually go and see the source for this. Here, it's basically a bash script that outputs this message, run in a Docker container, very simple. And then I just push this to Docker Hub and was able to install it with the add command. So add lets you basically install commands from a source. Currently, the only source you can use is Docker Hub. And so, for example, we could install some random thing on Docker Hub. Let's find JQ. And this one's popular, so I'll grab fucking Docker Hub. Grab this random JQ and install it. So now I can use JQ, which by itself is not very useful. You usually, give it a file or something. It doesn't have access to your files, so we use standard in. So for example, if we were to get my user profile from GitHub, which already is kind of nice, pretty printed when you get it, but we can actually run this through JQ, our JQ on command.io, colorize it, and we get this. So now we have sort of JQ as a service. And we can do all the things we can do with JQ, like kind of query this thing. And this doesn't have to be curl. It can be a local file that I cat into it. So that's kind of interesting. Another interesting use case, and again, because this is, you can use JQ from anywhere now. Anywhere you have an SSH client, you don't have to install it, make sure the machine has it or whatever, and that's kind of nice. Another kind of use case is using commands and tools that are really hard to set up. So for example, my friend Joel, he has his resume on GitHub. He produces this kind of nicely formatted PDF using LaTeX. And here's the source. And the way he makes that PDF is pretty simple. He just runs this one command. The problem is LaTeX is sort of notorious for being incredibly kind of difficult to get running, tons of dependencies, a lot of package managers, their package of LaTeX is broken, and then once you have it installed, it's actually it takes up a gig just for its specific dependencies. So Joel basically installs it whenever he needs to use it and then uninstalls it because he doesn't want it using up a gig. So I decided to use command.io to make him a version that he could kind of use on demand from anywhere without installing anything. So as a sort of example, we'll just grab this source file and we'll pipe it into command.io. Again, this could be a file that I'm catting into it. And I made this PDF LaTeX command. And then we'll pipe this out into resume.pdf. So this runs and we get a bunch of crazy output that looks like it doesn't work, but it's fine. That's just how LaTeX works. And if we open resume PDF, we get this nice PDF that was generated. One of the interesting things, though, is the way LaTeX works is it actually doesn't deal with pipes. It only works with files, and that's not that big of a problem because what we can do is basically make a script that takes standard in, writes it to a file, runs LaTeX. In this case, we're taking all that crazy output it has and send it to standard error, so we see it, but it doesn't end up in the output because we use the output to cat out the file that it created. So this is another very simple Docker file. And so that's kind of the basics. And the interesting things that you can do with command IO have to do with meta commands on the commands themselves. So these commands only affect this particular command, and we're going to talk about configuration and access control. So now that I've made this, only I can use it. I have to authenticate with SSH, and only my user sees this command, but I can actually share access to it with Joel by adding his GitHub username. And so now he shows up, and he can actually run this command. And to show you what that's like, I can actually run a command that he made for me. And so this works with basically username / a command that I have access to. And of course, I don't have access to any of the meta commands because I'm not an admin, but I have access so I can run it. So if we run it, we'll see what we get. Of course. It doesn't really count as a Rickroll if there's no audio. Or does it? So the other interesting thing, though, is configuration. There's no configuration here. Actually, so here's a command called env. It's actually just the same thing as env that you would normally have, and so it's showing us this container environment, which is not very interesting. But we can use this to demonstrate configuration. So I can set some configuration, oftentimes a secret, some kind of secret, right? And now when I run env, this secret is any environment. So basically lets you manage environment variables. And normally you wouldn't be showing these when you run the command would use them to do whatever. But these two things of access control and secrets or configuration management for these commands are really powerful because those two things let you do something that our original use case, I mean, I had a lot, but the thing that caused me to finally build this was, here's an app we're working on, and I want to have anybody be able to deploy it. And that often requires people having certain credentials and managing all this stuff. This simplifies it a lot. In this case, when we deploy this, we build it locally, and then we export it, export the Docker image, and just pipe it into this command on command IO. And we have this kind of configuration so people can specify their GitHub username, but anybody on the team can run this. And actually the source for this is in the project itself. So what does it look like? Grab standard in, write a file, get SSH key, which is the private SSH key this is going to use, that nobody needs because it's on command.io. And then we basically just pipe that image to our dev server. And so now, normally we actually had a version where all of this was in the makefile for deploy, but of course we'd have to have everybody's public key on that machine for this account, or create a separate key pair and share that private key with everybody. And so this is a lot simpler for people to be able, anybody to deploy from their computer. And then, with access control, I can add and remove people. So another interesting use case for this is something like Terraform, which is going to be able to provision infrastructure on, say, AWS or whatever. And so as an example project, here's a simple Terraform project. We define some variables. So it's going to need these secrets. We put those into the AWS provider. And then we can create AWS resources, in this case a VM called demo. Pretty straightforward. And normally we would just Terraform, first maybe plan and then apply. But if we do any of these, we can't because we don't have the credentials to actually use AWS. We don't want to share these with everybody, and we don't necessarily want to use Atlas. So this is a perfect candidate to run on command IO. The problem is, of course, there's multiple files here, and so far we've been piping in single files. That's actually not that big of a deal, because if you Google tar pipe, you can see a pretty common usage of tar, which is to multiplex files over a pipe. So if we do this, basically tars up the entire directory, which we can pipe to Terraform command that we have here, and we'll just run plan. So this is telling us what it would do if we were to run apply. It's going to create an instance, basically. Pretty straightforward. We can do that here. And so this is something that, again, if you had access to this command, you sort of indirectly have access to the credentials to be able to create resources in my AWS account, as well as having a Terraform state set up, which, to have a central state management for Terraform, you also have credentials, all that stuff. Don't even have to worry about that here. So that's kind of interesting, but it's a little kind of clunky having to do this tar pipe thing before stuff. And, you might have noticed, like, this is a Git repository. So wouldn't it be nice if we could do git push? Well, it turns out without really any special work in command.io, we support git push. If you look at our commands, we have a command here called get receive pack, which is basically the command that is run when you do a git push over SSH. So we actually have a remote set up here called tf that points to command.io, and a path, which is the repository that basically passes as an argument to get receive pack. So if I were to git push tf master, and we can script this however we want. In this case, I've actually made it so that the branch that we push to defines the command that we're going to run. So we've actually already deployed this, right? There's an instance running on AWS. We should be able to see that now. Over Git, we can get this output. So why don't we just destroy it? Okay, so, and then of course we could run plan again and deploy it again, all over git push. And again, anybody could then set up this remote and be able to run these commands. So that's pretty cool. And actually, so you can kind of see we've made git push sort of very programmable. We can kind of get it to do almost whatever we want. The source for my get receive pack is actually pretty simple. For the most part, it just runs get receive pack, except before that we do basically create the repository so that you can kind of push any repository, and then depending on the name of the repository, we install some hooks that we have in here. So this is fairly generic, and then these hooks, so I've created a Terraform, any repository with Terraform in the path, it'll run this, which is pretty straightforward. Sets up Terraform remote config, which is done with configuration for the command, and then based on the branch, we run a different command. That's it. It's super straightforward. There's another type of hook. If we were to push to something with push at the beginning of the repository name, we do something different. In this case, we log into Docker Hub, build with Docker, and then push it to Docker Hub. So this is kind of cool. This is actually how I deploy this command. Whenever I make updates to it and I want to be able to use it on command.io, all I have to do is push it to Docker Hub. And so to kind of automate that, I can do that here. So I've set up this remote that points to command.io and my push hook, and then this path, which is used to figure out what we want to tag it and how we want to push it to Docker Hub. And so now we can just say git push Docker Hub master. So it's going to build it. I don't even have to have Docker. It's going to build it in Docker based on the Docker file and all the source files there. And then when it's done building, it's automatically going to tag it and push it there to Docker Hub. So you can kind of imagine now how you can use this for any kind of deployment scenario, whether you're using SSH or whether you're using Docker images or whether you're using, I don't know, Ansible or Chef or Puppet or whatever, or pushing to Heroku, which would be kind of silly. but maybe you want to add git push to App Engine or some other platform as a service, you can kind of now use git push for anything. But of course, it's not just git push, it's any kind of SSH command, and so that's really cool. So anyway, this will eventually be 100% open source. It's one of many projects that are sort of coming out of Glider Labs, and we'll be releasing this pretty soon, so if you're interested, definitely subscribe to the list link below, and you'll find out when you can start using this. So anyway, thanks.